Well, good morning. I'm here today with my colleague, Dr. Jennifer Sechler. Dr. Sechler and I work together at the Forum Health Partners Clinic in Austin, Texas, former Texas Integrative Medicine. And our topic today is genetic evaluations in health and wellness and chronic disease. Dr. Sechler and I both have a special interest in this, and we know that it does definitely have a very important place in not only people who have chronic illness, often at the hands of environmental exposures, but also people that are just interested in maintaining optimal health and wellness. Dr. Sechler joined me in the practice here in Austin, I think about 2 years ago, and her background is as a geriatric nurse practitioner, and she also has formal training and certification in chiropractic, which comes in real handy in her approach to functional or natural medicine. But together we've pursued an interest in genetics, and we're going to talk a little bit today about that interest and how you can access it, the public can access it, and what it can do for you. So Dr. Sechler, Dr. Jenny, tell us a little bit more about you and why you became interested in genetics.
No, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I love working with you for the past couple of years. I'm kind of a knowledge junkie, and I was an ER nurse for 20 years, and then I got a couple of masters as a family nurse practitioner, geriatric, and it just kind of keeps leading me down to asking more questions. And the more questions I ask, the more answers that I'm really seeking, to really learn about health and how the body really heals. So I think every symptom is like a conversation. So the secret is almost like learning how to have that conversation with our symptoms. And it's almost like you're like little detectives, trying to figure out how to have that conversation. And genetics, I think, plays a huge part in helping you to have that conversation. So when you run the genetics, it's almost like you're getting a roadmap. And you can kind of see what detours, maybe what roadblocks that, that person might be running into that will kind of help you to have that conversation to develop better strategies.
Exactly. And I think for me, genetics is so important because it seems like chronic illness, at least that I see, seems to be kind of a convergence of the toxins and stresses of our environment with our own personal resilience or ability to resist those toxins. And so much of what has to do with our personal resilience or ability to deal with the threats and toxins of today's world is wrapped up in our inherited genetics, half from mom, half from dad. So I found that for many of my patients to look into that in the ways that we can now do today seems to be a big way that we can help a person actually change that resilience. Because as you say, there are detours around many of these genetic abnormalities. So talk to me a little bit about the role that you see genetics playing in your patients.
It's a tool. So I think it's important to have many tools in your toolbox. And honestly, I think the majority of the patients that come to our clinic have been so many other places. They spent a lot of money on different therapies and treatments that haven't been helpful for them. So we're almost like a last place for them to visit. So most of them have not had genetics testing. So when you present it to them, they're like, this could be another little key to help us. So I like to do the genetics because, again, it is a roadmap. And it can tell you where these different blocks are. And I kind of like one of Ben Lynch's descriptions, and he talks about it. It's like a genetic SNP is like the degree of work a particular enzyme has to do. So let's say that enzyme has to do too much work or 200% because you have too much stress in your life right now. You're going through a divorce. You're eating like crap. All those things that are directly influencing that genetic expression. So once we have an understanding of that, then, we can say, well, let's modify your diet. Let's give you some stress modalities to help you. And that actually will directly change how your genetics are influencing itself.
Sure. And you mentioned Ben Lynch. I think a lot of our viewers today probably know of Ben Lynch because he seemed to bring a lot of this genetic evaluation kind of into the mainstream with his with his work, probably going back about 10 years or so, on the MTHFR gene. But I wonder if you might comment a little bit about that historically, because I think even today, many people that come into my practice will tell me, well, you know, I've got a genetic problem. I have the MTHFR gene. And that's kind of a little bit of a, it kind of makes my me cringe just a little bit, because it's such a isolated look at the whole issue of genetics. But why don't you talk to the viewers a little bit that maybe don't know about Ben Lynch's work?
Exactly. I could agree with you. I'm going to back up a little bit. You know, I think that we used to think I think we gave so much power to our genes, you know, years ago. Whatever your gene said, it was the master of everything, right? It predetermined your health. You couldn't do anything about it. And people bought into that story. Oh, I've got obesity gene. Oh, I can't do anything about it. So they live that story out, right? But then epigenetics came along and said, hold on a second, let's really look at this. And then we kind of learned that our behavior, right, and our environment is directly influencing. So people kind of said, oh, well, hold on a second, how can we use this? So I like functional medicine, how they kind of termed this. They said genes are like the gun and the environment is like the trigger. So I think learning that partnership, realizing that, oh, it kind of made us step back and say, oh, we all kind of had an aha moment, or most people did at least. You know, then Ben Lynch kind of shows up, you know, and kind of brings all these, I think he has like the 10 most important genes. So I've read his books, it's great stuff. But then exactly, people are coming out now saying, oh, I've got this MTHFR and I can't do anything about it. But it's just one piece of the pie. You know, it's just one gene. And I think it was actually Chris Kresser too that talked about this, that if you do a genetics testing and you get this SNP and they go on high dose methylfolate, well, that can actually backfire on you. So some of the research now is actually showing that. And actually, I think it's important that you need to take it a step further. Look at your functional methylation markers, because just because you might have that marker doesn't mean it's going to express itself. I think that's where I even got confused when I started learning genetics too. Just because you have it again doesn't mean it's expressing. Or something that's not expressing, that it's not showing on your testing, doesn't mean it's not going to express. So it's almost like it's a step one, and you've got to take it, you know, further steps down the road. So I love some of these methylation lab. I know Dr. Data has one. I think we use that a little bit to then further tell people, okay, let's look at how you're expressing functional methylation pathways.
Yeah, let me just fill in a couple of gaps. You're using some terms that maybe some people could appreciate having them defined. But you know, in our genes, this is the DNA that we inherit. It's basically, we have 3 billion letters, or what we call base pairs, from our mom and 3 billion from our father. Together we have 6 billion of these base pairs. And these base pairs, you can think of them as like very long words or letters. Basically, there's only 4 letters in that alphabet. But each one of those genes, which is a sequence of these 4 base pairs, A, T, C, and G, together makes up a recipe for the body to build a protein. And a protein, of course, is a sequence of amino acids. There's 20 that we use to make human proteins. And basically, it's these proteins that really dictate what we are: our eye color, our hair color, the way our enzymes function, the way our nerves function, the way our hormones function, all comes from these proteins. And as you so aptly mentioned, the genes are the recipes for those proteins. But just like having a cookbook with a great recipe in it doesn't mean you're going to be able to serve a good meal at a party. You've got to be able to express those genes. You've got to be able to turn those recipes into the actual proteins. Now, as far as Ben Lynch, you know, he's a naturopathic doctor up in Seattle who basically started to focus in on this gene called the MTHFR gene, which is a gene that actually, it's a recipe for a gene that codes for an enzyme that actually plays a role in the activation of vitamin B9 folate. And it turns out that the folate and vitamin B12 are critical for a whole group of enzymes, probably between 200 and 300 in the human body, which are what we call methyltransferase genes. But they require both B12 and folate to function effectively. Now, methylation transfer has to happen all over the body, for things to work, for our brain to work, to make what we call brain chemicals called neurotransmitters, for energy metabolism, for hormone metabolism, melatonin. So many things require methylation. And if that particular gene, if you inherit these abnormalities, what we call Snips, that it may dictate that the enzyme that you can cook from your recipe doesn't work as well to perform this step called methylation or methyl group transfers. So that's just kind of a little quick background. And yes, it's important because methylation is really important to our metabolism. But literally, it's only one of about 23,000 different proteins that we're capable to make from our own genetic recipes, if you will. So obviously, one is important, but I think there's many, many more that are important. So just wanted to give that quick background.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I kind of jumped ahead of myself there. Thank you. Yeah, those are great points. I think all the genes we're learning about are so vital, but I think we still don't know so much. I think so far, I almost look at analogy as like the genetics are like learning the players of a team. I grew up in Wisconsin, so I'm a Packer fan, right? So every team has a certain dynamic to it, right? So those are how those genes all play together. So if you're a Bears fan, etc., that's a different dynamic. So our bodies really have a certain dynamic in which it cooperates and how it plays.
Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about from a logistics standpoint, how we evaluate genes, you and I, in our clinic?
Yeah, so it's part of a workup. I know we both do a pretty extensive workup with people. A lot of people have a lot of multiple issues when they come into our clinic. So we do a lot of functional labs. A lot of labs people will bring in. To me, they're just like numbers, but I want to know how the body is functioning. So this allows us, to see exactly how the body is functioning and how it's talking to each other, how it's talking to each cells, to its organs and glands, and then what we can do to step in to provide strategies to optimize the functioning. I don't think we're not substituting something for the body, but I think our goal is to help to identify blocks. We're big on toxins. Toxins can do so much damage to our minds and our bodies, and we're exposed to them every day. We live in a polluted world. And if our bodies can't process them, it's going to create us a lot of problems, right? I call it, we take crap in every day. We have to get rid of the crap in some way, right? We pee it out, we poop it out, we sweat it out, we breathe it out. So we have to have those pathways working really well so we don't get that buildup of toxins, and they can show up in brain fog and irritable bowel syndrome in so many different ways as the body wants to express itself. And then we have to figure out, well, we know what pathways are blocked, etc. And we have great tools in our office. We've got the sauna and IV therapies to support the body to help those pathways to work better.
Great. Yeah, exactly. And, even when it comes to just evaluating the person's genetics, to try to understand the part that's playing in their process, I have to say that there's all kinds of different options that we have. Some people will come in only knowing about the status of the MTHFR gene, that one gene of the 23,000. And, that's an important gene to know, but also many people come in to show me reports from a whole bunch of other different platforms that have now come out in the marketplace. Things like, I'm not going to name names, but there's quite a number of them that actually will look at a group of genes, sometimes as few as 25 to as many as 200 or 300. And then from that little cross section of the 23,000, they try to make some interpretations as far as our predilections or our predispositions for health and disease. Now, the one that I think you and I use is the one from methyl genetics, nutrition, or now they're calling it functional genomic analysis. But this is a saliva-based or spit-based test where they actually analyze literally thousands of these genes. They look at many of the Snips that we would have, and so it gives a much bigger picture. And on the even further down the spectrum than that, they now have the capability to sequence the entire human genome, all 3 billion times 2 of our genetic sequences. The thing about that one, which is being done some places, it used to cost several $1,000s and the price is coming down on that, is literally it gives us so much data that virtually it requires artificial intelligence or a computer to even begin to make heads or tails of what all those things mean. So you can go from just looking at one gene, the SNP that defines the MTHFR gene, all the way up to the total gene sequencing analysis with a computer interpretation. So we're kind of in the middle, but I feel like the piece of data that we're looking at and the report that it generates gives us a real good understanding of our patients and where they're going to have their potholes or their potential roadblocks that are going to either contribute to chronic illness from all these toxins or even to maybe cause them to have some issues with maintaining health, wellness, and longevity. But I know you wanted to talk about some of the specific genes that you found important.
Yeah, I think some of the other common ones are, the COMT. It's a lot about mood. That's kind of a popular one, especially when people want to talk about brain function. I know one of the biggest fears I think people have is Alzheimer's and demencia, right? So they're
Absolutely.
all worried, is there some magical test, that can tell us, am I going to get this? So I mean, I like some of the genetic issues, but I think we have to be careful too, not to give it too much power. Okay, so maybe your father had it, or I know my grandfather had it. I mean, I'm not afraid, but I know that I have to be very aware, of how I treat my brain, so you can take those strategies. So again, I think they're powerful tools to use, but I don't want us to get carried away. So I know you and I we're kind of on the same page with that, but I think we have to be careful because some people have come in, oh my gosh, I'm going to get this, and then they're in a state of fear, right? Now they're in a state of fight or flight, and it's hard to help anybody heal when they're in that constant state of fear. So we do a lot of education in our office, and I love the genetic test we had because it's so complex, but it does give us a bigger picture of kind of helping to show them and educate them really, okay, maybe you have a weakness here. Maybe you've got a COMT gene. Doesn't mean it's going to be dramatic for you or you're going to fall into some kind of pothole, as you said, but we just need to be aware of that and then can support you.
Yeah, great. Now, just one example of that is, a lot of places in our bodies, we have what we call metabolic pathways, but we start with some nutrient, say from the diet, let's call it A, and we have to transform it through a series of steps to say a final product, like let's say vitamin A, for example. And all of these different steps of this metabolic pathway are dictated or assisted by these proteins that we call enzymes. And if any of those enzymes have a genetic problem, what we are calling Snips, it may slow down or even stop that ability of that metabolic pathway to happen. So what we've learned is that if we've got a SNP here that's preventing us from getting effectively to say this vitamin A here, that we can use that piece of knowledge to know, okay, well, we need to put in more vitamin A because the body can't go from building block A to vitamin A. So we've got to bypass that block, that SNP, that genetic pothole, if you will. So that's just one example of what Dr. Sechler and I are talking about, of how we use the knowledge of these genes to help determine detours around some of these roadblocks.
Exactly. I think we kind of take the extra step because sometimes as people bring in these tests and I've got this gene and they automatically get put on the supplement. Well, I think we need to take a step back, and then we like to look at where are the nutritional deficiencies? What nutritional deficiencies do you even have? So then we can do that kind of testing, because that honestly can be a primary cause of impaired methylation, right?
Exactly.
So then we can look at that, then we can look at their B12 and their folate, other things that you can do that are needed are cysteine, taurine, amino acids, DHA, all those things play a part. So if you're just skipping over them, I think you're missing a huge part really in how to support their bodies. Another thing, I like to say that you can eat your way to better methylation. you know?
Exactly.
So eat your
Sure.
broccoli, eat your spinach. Honestly, I used to eat it for breakfast. I was trying to eat my way to better methylation several years ago. I'm like, by gosh, I'm going to eat my way to it. So yeah, I did a little methyl B12, but every breakfast, the traditional American breakfast, I just don't think is very supportive to our bodies. So I would have vegetables. I'd fry them up in olive oil every morning and I'd eat those. So I made some progress. It didn't do 100%, but still, you can do those little things that can really be very supportive for you.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the first good route to complete nutrients is through a balanced, healthy, nutrient-rich diet. Unfortunately, in today's world, it's a little harder to get that kind of diet than it was for our forefathers 10 or 20,000 years ago. That's
Yeah,
why there is definitely often a place for supplements. But
yeah,
Bob Miller, who is the developer of the gene test that we use, will say all the time, your genes is not a diagnosis. It really just talks about a predisposition. And even though a genetic SNP or a genetic defect or mutation, however you want to call it, certainly could suggest that a certain supplement might be of benefit because it may allow a detour around a metabolic pathway, that's certainly no guarantee that at the end of the day, using that supplement is going to cause any specific change in any one individual. So I always tell people, your genes suggest that you might benefit from this nutrient or, this food, but there's no way to guarantee that because, as we say, it has so much to do with the way the gene is expressed or the way the recipe is cooked into the final product.
exactly. That's why I really like, I kind of call it the six basics. We can take those six basics and then apply them to your own genetics. So obviously the food, the food is huge. The water. I think most people are dehydrated today. Our body's made up of what, 70, 80% of water. So you think about our cells, if you're dehydrated, they're kind of dry and brittle, almost like leather. Well, they're not going to function very well, right? If something is really dry and brittle. So I think we underestimate even just the power of drinking water. So that's another basic, movement, getting that lymphatic system moving, helping our liver to, again, process all those toxins we take in every day. That can be a critical piece for a lot of people. Our sleep. There's a lot of people that don't sleep very well. They don't go to bed till 2 o'clock in the morning. So again, getting their cycle back to going to bed early or getting into that deep REM sleep is crucial to help their genetics. They can express themselves in a better manner. And lastly, the mind. We have like 60,000 thoughts every single day, and the majority of those are negative. So paying attention, I know you do some great mind work with some things that you're doing. So it's a huge part in really, I think, in helping there's a really interesting study. It was out of the University of California, San Diego. And there's some research that showed meditation in just 4 days influenced positively genetic expression.
Isn't that powerful?
It's extremely that's just amazing that we can do that. So I think we need to be using that and exposing more people, to that information.
Sure. A lot of people have been asking me with some of the things we're facing right now with this viral pandemic, as far as what can I do for my immune system, and I tell them probably the thing they can do the first that might have the most power is to just learn to calm their mind, and that there's a lot of good studies that show in humans and in lab animals that just a positive frame of mind coming out of that state of fight or flight will actually increase the effectiveness of our immune systems by a factor of 5. So yeah, that's a hugely important point that you're raising there.
Yeah, it's just kind of, I think, overlooked a lot. Oh, go home and learn how to meditate, etc. Well, you can't just go home and meditate. There are steps to take, but I think it is something that I know we spend time on it, but I think more people need to spend more time on really talking to people about mindfulness and how to get out of them. I mean, I went to Trader Joe's last week. I was standing in line with my mask on and my 6 feet. Honestly, by the time I got to my car, I was feeling anxious. It wasn't a good experience, and that's how we're all kind of feeling right now. So having an awareness, I need to go home and get in my pool. I need to go listen to some relaxing music because I don't feel well.
Exactly. And I kind of like the point that you made earlier that, yeah, even though genetic evaluation and assessment is important and can be very valuable, there's a lot of things we can do without going to that step to get a person well. You mentioned, nutrients and the state of their mind and their exercise and their sleep. And there's so many things. I mean, for me, taking care of a patient with chronic illness, it's really all about getting them well, right? And so, I look at the toxins, I look at their life, their lifestyle, their diet. And yeah, sometimes the genes is something that we bring in to try to help further understand and analyze what's going on with our patients. But there's so many ways that we can actually get patients well and help maintain their health and wellness short of that. So that's a good point that you made.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes I think there's almost so many tools, it can be overwhelming. So I sometimes have tried to break it up into 3 systems, help their digestive system, balance their hormones, and help them detoxify. And if you can do those 3 systems and get them working well, I mean, you're going to make some great strides.
Exactly. And, there's a lot we can learn about the detoxification system through genetic evaluations. You want to
Yes.
address just some of the things we learned from that?
Yes, I think that's absolutely amazing. And then I know Bob Miller, he talks about, let's get those done. He tests so many genes for that. And I'll give you some red flags, oh my gosh, I don't think this person's detoxing well. And then you can take it a step further and go ahead and do that, actually the breakdown for the methylation pathway, and actually see what part of your pathway, isn't functioning well. And then we can step in and actually address it either with lifestyle or a specific supplement, and actually help it that pathway works so much better. I think I still find it amazing that we can know that much detail about that pathway that plays such an important part of our life.
Exactly. And for me, one of the main nutrients involved in our detox pathways is my old friend glutathione.
Yes.
That tripeptide, or that very short protein made up of glycine, cysteine, and glutamate. And I know that we get lots of information from the genetic testing that we get through Bob Miller that tells us about defects or roadblocks in that glutathione pathway. But glutathione, along with a lot of the other sulfur-containing metabolic substances in our bodies, is crucial for detoxification. The other thing that's huge is the information that we can get about how our genes play into our ability to generate energy in the form typically of ATP, which is that little molecule with a very powerful phosphate group attached to it that comes from our mitochondria. And it turns out there's many metabolic roadblocks that would predict that we wouldn't have the ability to create energy properly. Of course, we see that play out so often in the chronic fatigue that our patients come in with.
Yes. Thank you for bringing up glutathione. It's probably one of my favorite nutrients. And not to mention our clinic again, but we have an amazing IV clinic. And just to see the difference in people when they get some IV glutathione, it really is amazing. I have one woman right now that she's, Jenny, my skin looks clear. My friends are telling me that I look younger. And, so it can make a dramatic difference. So, whatever route you use, it's very beneficial, but glutathione definitely is a key piece to helping that liver, help detoxify.
I don't know if you saw, but I posted on my Facebook page, the Texas Integrative Facebook page, a really good article that had been done that showed that one of the common features of some of the people that are really having the worst outcomes, even dying from the pandemic, has to do with low glutathione. And a lot of times it's because for genetic reasons, they are not able to make it as well as they need to. Because almost all of our glutathione isn't eaten. We don't eat glutathione. It's actually a delicate little tripeptide that tends to get broken down by the digestive juices, but we make it in the liver with these metabolic enzymes that come from our genes. And it turns out that if we can't make it at a fast enough rate, and we make it 24/7, 365, that we're going to be deficient. And it looks like a deficiency of glutathione directly contributes to our bodies going into a state of excess oxidation, or what we call free radical excess. And that's why glutathione plays such a big role as an antioxidant to be able to reverse that. And it looks like it's a deficiency of antioxidant capacity in large part that dictates who's going to have a bad outcome versus a good outcome if they should contract a virus, of any sort, but particularly a really, really dangerous one.
Right. That's very interesting. That's kind of plays into the part of, I think, just aging. We don't think about it, or we accept aging as, oh, we're going to get all this dreadful illnesses, diseases, but there are just certain things that happen as we age, and glutathione decreased production is one of them. So to have an awareness of that, and let's just start supplementing with it. Take a little bit of it. You can monitor your levels to be sure that level stays up high enough, to prevent some of these things from happening. So we run into this kind of issue in our environment right now. We can kind of hopefully starve off some of those things from ever getting us.
Have you ever seen those pictures of identical twins later in life that shows one twin that just really looks great and much younger than their actual age, and then the other twin that maybe looks ancient? Mm-hmm. And it all boils down to different lifestyle, different diet, different exercise and sleep patterns. Perhaps one of them was a smoker and the other one wasn't a smoker. I mean, I've always been stunned when I see that, because that's such an immediate picture of how our genes are expressed. Exactly. And how different that can make our lives be. Exactly.
I agree. And that's, I think, the importance of actually getting some of this stuff done, just so kind of what may I be looking at down the road, how I can step in now, create better stress strategies, support myself with glutathione, etc. So I don't, kind of end up down that roadway.
Sure. One of my favorite genes to understand is the NOx gene. Mm. Yeah, that's one that Bob Miller has really taught us a lot about that. But I think that's probably a way more important gene to understand than even the MTHFR gene, because it has so much to do with our oxidation, antioxidant pathways and situations. But we're just learning that the way the body handles free radicals and oxidation is really critical to our overall health and well-being. And there's a place for both. That's the interesting thing, is that we actually have to generate free radicals in some parts of our body. For example, in our white blood cells, we are not able to kill germs and viruses unless our white blood cells can generate free radicals within these tiny little pockets where we put viruses and bacteria for destruction. And then in other parts of the body, of course, free radicals are very harmful. They'll damage our DNA, they'll damage our mitochondria. And in those situations, we need to be able to neutralize those free radicals, get rid of them. So it's very interesting. It's not an all or none type of picture.
Exactly. One of the other genes I think I've been pretty intrigued with working with Bob Miller is the DAO. And because it's sensitive to certain foods and chemicals.
Well, tell us a little bit about it. What does it do?
At first I had some questions, and I had to look at that for a while, but now I'm like, that's really interesting, because so many people have so many food sensitivities or food allergies. I think it's a really hard thing to pinpoint, because a lot of people have delayed food allergies. So they think, okay, I ate this today, I feel okay, and then maybe the next day I feel worse. Well, what did I have today? So it gets very confusing. But this gene can really kind of show you a little bit more that you actually might have some predispositions. And then it kind of takes me to the whole histamine issue. We talk about the histamine.
Because that's what DAO does, right? It's one of the ways that the body breaks down or disenables the toxin known as histamine. But let's talk about that histamine, because a lot of people don't understand. Histamine seems like it's really bad, and yet it's made in the body. So what's the deal?
Yes, that's a really good question. So we need the histamine, right, to fight off against different pollutants, toxins, etc. But then it can kind of get up and kind of go over the cliff a little bit, and then kind of backfire on people. So exactly, everything, there's a balance to everything. That's why I kind of go over the edge sometimes when I hear people taking these massive doses of certain things, because everything has a balance. Like calcium, magnesium is their balance. Sodium, potassium, they have to be in balance. So anytime you accelerate one of those, you're going to negatively impact your partner.
Exactly. Right? Mm-hmm. I think that old saying, nothing in excess, is just so important for health and in the human body, and through all these metabolic pathways. I mean, just about any nutrient in excess can become a toxin.
Exactly.
Histamine's a perfect example of that. The immune system makes and releases histamine all over the place because of the beneficial role that it plays. But because it's so toxic to our cells and tissues, we have to be able to throttle it or basically manage it. And DAO is one of the main ways the body does that. A lot of people might know about mast cells. One of the main little toxins that they contain within them is this histamine. And so when the mast cells release that histamine inappropriately or indiscriminately, and we're not able to inactivate it, we get problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's really fascinating work. And I love Bob Miller's doing a lot of research on some other genes too. So I'm really anxious to find out what he's learning about that so we can start utilizing that information. So information's power. So the more we learn, the more we can help our clients.
So if somebody was interested to try to look at that genetic piece of their health puzzle, what would you tell them that would involve? Like if you were just at a dinner party and talking to a friend or family member about what that means from a specific standpoint. How do they access it with us? And then what is the process that we would typically follow?
Yeah, just basically, I have our card, so I can give them our office phone number and they can come and we actually do free 15-minute meet and greets with both of us so they can talk to us and get some questions answered, or they can just come in for their first visit and sit down with us. And I always like to learn, what their goals are, what their primary issues are, and then we can kind of share that. It's really it's an easy test. It's a saliva based test.
And it's not expensive.
No, it's not. I can't remember how much it's.
I think it's like $300
yeah.
to get the saliva test run.
Yeah,
takes a few weeks to get the results
yeah.
back. I think about 3 weeks to get the results back.
Yeah, it does. But the explanation is very detailed, and I think it kind of gives people a lot of aha moments, and then allows some good strategies to put in place to move forward. So it's a pretty easy procedure.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that you look at these gene Snips in this report, and I think our report is over 50 pages long, literally talking about thousands of different Snips from hundreds of different enzymes. A lot of people think that a particular Snip equals a particular vitamin or supplement or nutrient. And that can be true in a way, like that analogy I gave earlier, but a lot of times it's just guidelines, and it doesn't dictate any particular SNP, does not dictate any particular disease or the need for any particular nutrient. It can project which ones would be most likely to be beneficial, but it's always statistics. And I always have to tell my patients that, based on your genetics, it looks like this would help, but there's no guarantee.
Right, exactly. It kind of goes back to the same thing what I think Chris Kresser had said. Doesn't mean that you have a negative expression of that gene. Perhaps you have a lot of stress right now in your life. You're going through a divorce, etc. You're living through this pandemic, right? So if you implement some stress relieving strategies, that can take care of perhaps, that negative expression. So it can be quite simple, if you just understand what you're looking at.
So it's one piece of the puzzle, but to get the genes tested and then to have us go through this report and help you interpret the possible meaning of these genes in light of your own personal situation, your toxins and your other, your lifestyle and your other nutrients and your stress levels and your sleep patterns, all these other things. Yeah, it is one big piece of the puzzle that often at the end of the day can equate to better health.
Exactly, right. It's never just one issue. I think we do a good job of looking at the entire picture. There's so many factors, and typically people respond really well. So it's a lot of fun, to work with the clients and the genetics.
Yeah, and I think even people that don't necessarily even have chronic illness, maybe it's just people that just want to maximize their ability to stay safe and healthy and want to go for that longevity piece and that anti-aging piece. I mean, the genetics can even be helpful there in predicting where their possible future problems might be. And,
Exactly.
one thing that's come from this pandemic that's kind of cool is that now we have the capability to interact with people all over the world through telehealth, using the Zoom platform like we're doing today, or even telephone, so that we can actually even help them access this genetic test wherever they might be, and then help them interpret the results of that in light of their own personal situation. So that's kind of exciting. And again, you would just contact our office directly, or you could contact us through Forum Health to be able to access that.
Exactly. I love telehealth. It's making healthcare so much more accessible. So there always is trying to look at something positive that's coming out of something negative. So yeah, I think it's a great platform to use, and we can help a lot of people that way.
Well, Dr. Sechler, I'm really excited that you've gotten all this extra training and have taken this special interest in our genes and can be available to add that piece of the wellness and longevity puzzle for our patients. And I think it just predicts good things for many people that we can interact with. Do you have any parting comments or thoughts?
I think maybe I love what you just said, whether you have a chronic illness or not, or whether you just want to age well, genetics can play a part in your health. It just depends on what's going on in your life. So right now I'm working with a few people that they just want to age well. They're not sick at all. So I love that part, or if you're sick, we can use that too to help you strategize to be better health. So you can use it in any facet, any time of your life, just to help really optimize your aging process.
Yeah, until we get to that place where we can actually edit or modify genes, which it looks like it's coming down the road. At least for now, we can't do that. But as I say, there are lots of detours around some of our genetic potholes or roadblocks. And so there is a place to know what your genetics show, and then how you might be able to deal with that. Having that foreknowledge can really be very protective. So Jenny, thank you for taking the time today to share some of this information with our viewers, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.